Welcome back. For those of you that I've not had a chance to meet yet and say hello, I'm Lisa Roberts. I'm the Deputy Vice-Chancellor for Research and Innovation. I've been at Leeds for just over a year now, started at the same time as Tom, who you met earlier. And I've been asked to give a brief introduction to research at Leeds. Now I have to warn you that I could have taken hours to talk about the great research at Leeds, but I've only got sort of 10-15 minutes, so I'm really just going to focus on some recent highlights and tell you a bit about some future initiatives as well. So, our strategy, our ambition, as I'm sure many of you know, is all about increasing the volume of our research, i.e. bringing more income, doing more of it, increasing the quality, and importantly, increasing the impact of our research. And it's clear that we're already doing very well. We're already top 10 in the UK for research power and research impact. So the analogy I sometimes use is it feels like we're that 2 Michelin star restaurant at the moment, and we want to firmly establish ourselves as a 3 Michelin star and be a true global leader. So some of the things that we're doing now is really about getting that 3rd Michelin star. So this year we've seen some great success. Our new research awards have grown 16% since last year to 167 million. And we've already got off to a strong start this year. Some of this has been driven by significant success in bringing in larger awards. So we recently secured 2 large awards, totalling 16 million between the 2 of them, from the Global Challenges Research Fund. And this is a government fund that tackles global challenges of national interest and addresses problems faced by developing countries. And these are high-profile African-based projects, really aimed at building resilience in communities and businesses in Africa. One of the ones we were awarded money for was to create evidence-based policy to develop sustainable and productive agricultural systems in Africa. And the other one was to develop greater weather forecasting precision to enable them to respond better to crises coming from weather incidences. And in this GCRF funding space, I'm really pleased to say that we at the University of Leeds have received more awards than any other UK university. So we're doing well in this space. And it's really pleasing to see that the awards really span the disciplines that we have at Leeds too. So the very latest one, where we've received £2 million, is for a project that supports marginalised communities in different regions and countries to advocate for change using community filmmaking tools. So the research uses traumatic incidences such as the Holocaust and the Rwandan genocide to try and prevent hate crime and promote understanding and inclusivity. So really spanning from arts and cultures to science and engineering. Last month we were also awarded only one of 4 awards across the whole of the UK from the new Connecting Capability Fund, which is aligned with the government's industrial strategy. This award is joint with Manchester and Sheffield, and it will establish something called the Northern Triangle Initiative. And this is really to help take novel research to market much quicker. It aims to raise a further £350 million in private finance to support university commercialisation and really to strengthen sort of entrepreneurial activity in the north of England. And finally, our great success with the EPSRC last year means that we've regained our EPSRC framework partner status. And again, that means that we're one of only 12 universities with that privileged status in the UK. So the recognition of our leadership and expertise in certain research areas has also been cemented with our acceptance into some major research consortia this year. So we're now partners with a very small number of other leading universities in 3 new national centres. So we're one of 9 partners in the Henry Royce Institute, which is the National Centre for Research into Advanced Functional Materials. We're one of 6 partners in the newly formed Rosalind Franklin Institute, which will develop new technologies in the engineering and physical sciences that we can apply to health and life sciences. And although not officially announced, so don't tell anyone outside of this room, we're also now a partner in the Alan Turing Institute, which has 8 partners and is the National Data Science Institute. And these consortia are really important to be part of because clearly they have great national and international recognition. But we anticipate that major funding is going to flow through these institutes. So it's really critical that we're there as part of them. And we also have a collaboration with the Crick Institute in London through our clinical PhD academy. So really great initiatives that Leeds needs to be and is part of. And the bottom one there in italics, because we don't yet know the outcome, fingers crossed, we last month submitted another bid with Manchester, Sheffield, Newcastle and Liverpool to become a northern hub of a new National Institute for Health and Biomedical Informatics Research. So hopefully we'll hear the outcome of that one fairly soon, interviews in December. As some of you may know, and we talked about this a little this morning in the previous session, one of the major USPs at Leeds is our strength in working across disciplines to answer some big research questions. And the breadth and depth of our research means we do this really well, and new people that have joined us have said that it really happens at Leeds, whereas many others talk about it. We actually do it. We have 6 grand challenge interdisciplinary research themes across the university, which bring academics across the university, across different disciplines together to tackle really important grand challenge research questions that need many angles coming together from science, engineering, social sciences and the arts. And these are all areas in which Leeds has the critical mass and capability to make major contributions to tackling challenges through this world-class interdisciplinary impact-oriented research. But of course these big questions that we're tackling need to be underpinned by the very best research infrastructure or enabling platforms. And you'll hear about some of these jewels in the crown later this morning, and you'll see some of those later in the Parkinson Court. But these are the things that really set Leeds apart and allow us to conduct the best research and attract and retain the best people at Leeds. And some of the recent investment in these areas is really allowing us to stay ahead of the pack. So you're going to hear in a second about our great research in the Astbury Centre for Structural Molecular Biology, and we've recently invested 17 million in that centre. You'll also see some of our robotics research, which is helping us live healthier and longer lives. You'll hear about the Bragg Centre for Engineering Materials, which is the home to the Henry Royce Institute at Leeds. You'll hear about investments in imaging and advanced MRI, and you'll see and hear more about the Cultural Institute and its work with external partners. So please enjoy the rest of the talks and the displays that we have in Parkinson Court later. But investing in this great infrastructure alone clearly isn't just going to lead to world-class research. We also need to couple this with investment in really great people. So we need to recruit and support the development of the next generation of research leaders at Leeds. Now we have our sector-leading 250 Great Minds programme, which is recruiting early career academics and also established professors to Leeds. But critically, this is aligned with investments in postgraduate researchers as well, to really make sure that we push through this pipeline. And of course, your support in these areas has been critical through fellowships and scholarships, and made it really possible to bring great minds to Leeds, so thank you. There's still more to do. I'm personally keen to think of ways in which we can support that really difficult transition from being a good postdoctoral researcher to becoming an independent academic. And I think there are ways that we can maybe think of funding that critical transition, because we don't want to lose great talent at that stage in their careers. And I'm also keen to ensure that we support great ideas to be developed, especially with people just starting out. How do we make sure that they have the resource to take forward some of their great ideas? I mentioned the impact and the importance of the impact of our research earlier, and clearly it's crucial that the research and innovation from Leeds is used for societal and economic benefit. And more than ever, with the government's industrial strategy, it's critical that we work more closely with industry and other external partners to generate that impact from our research. So in order to create a step change in the way we do this, we've got a really exciting initiative coming on stream next autumn, which I know some of you know about, which is the opening of Nexus, our new innovation centre. Now this is not only going to be a fabulous building in which we house and nurture startups and SMEs in both state-of-the-art lab and office space, but it's going to act as a gateway for external organisations to access our capabilities and expertise. And we see it as a real gateway for that collaborative innovation. And after a visit to some innovation centres in Boston, which was facilitated by one of our alumni, so again, thank you, I've got some really interesting ideas as to how we might support this sort of innovative and entrepreneurial activity within our academics, maybe through some sort of Nexus fellowships. And again, because of visits that some of our alumni have arranged for me, we've also been learning from the very best, both in the UK and overseas, places like MIT and Caltech, how we design our new corporate relationships programme at Leeds. So more to come on that. I did just want to show you our promotional video for Nexus, which will hopefully explain a little bit more about what it's about. So hopefully you can see we're making some huge progress. But of course, as new challenges and opportunities arise, we need to make sure that we're well positioned to respond to them. So I'm just going to finish by giving you a tiny flavour of some new initiatives that we're working on. And again, I can talk about these for hours, so if you want to find out more, I will be at Parkinson over lunch, so please do stop me. The Sir William Henry Bragg development was mentioned earlier, the largest capital programme the university's ever undertaken, £96 million. And this is the building that will integrate all of the engineering, physical sciences and computing activities to foster both interdisciplinary research, but importantly education as well. Last month we launched our new High-Speed Rail and System Integration Institute, with huge support from the rail sector and industry. And this will create a unique testing facility in Europe. And it will also be important in training that next generation of people who are going to work in the rail sector. Last month we also launched our new doctoral college to provide a better student experience for all of our postgraduate research students. And not yet live, but very much next in our sights, is the creation of a global food and environment institute that brings people from the university together to address the global challenges of food security, sustainable development and dietary health. We also aim through a new centre to solve problems of diabetic heart disease within 10 years. And finally, we're also positioning Leeds as the leading virtual reality university, and you'll see some of this later. Again, linking capabilities across all of the faculties with world-leading academic and industrial partners to enable these exciting technologies to benefit every area of society, whether that's in homes, classrooms, cars, office environments, right through to medical operating theatres. So hopefully next time you're here, we can tell you more about how we're getting on with some of those new initiatives. So enjoy your day. Please immerse yourself in the research displays and you'll find out lots more about some of the things I've mentioned and so much more. I have to say, as I say, I've been here just over a year now and I feel privileged every day to have this role because I get to hear about this great work every day and every day find out about a new piece of work that we're doing. And that makes me really proud to be at Leeds and to be part of it. And hopefully you'll agree that we've got some fabulous ingredients to put into that 3-star menu. My role also just gives me the chance to say a very big thank you to all of you and the support you give in so many different ways. Without your support, we really couldn't achieve the kinds of things that you're going to hear about today. And as I'm sure you'll see, it really is research that changes people's lives. So thank you very much for your support and enjoy the rest of the morning. So I was really the warm-up act for the really cool stuff. So I'd like to hand over now to our first speakers who are going to take you into the world of the Astbury structural molecular biology. And I'd introduce you to Professor Sheena Radford and Leon Willis. Thank you.
So welcome everyone, it's a delight to be here. I'm Sheena Radford, I'm currently Director of the Astbury Centre of Structural Molecular Biology. I'd like to introduce Leon Willis to you, wearing the white coat, looking more interesting than me. He's a PhD student in our laboratory. And what you're going to hear about for the next 15 minutes is proteins behaving badly. And we're going to tell you about proteins behaving badly in your brains. And we're going to tell you how proteins behaving badly are a major threat to development of new drugs, biopharmaceuticals, and how we're trying to use the tools and the powers of structural biology to help in both of these areas. We're going to train our proteins to behave well as our PhD students. So you'll all be aware of the major advances we've had over the last, in the 1950s onwards, in the development of antibiotics that have helped us to cure many diseases. Here is an example of a small molecule, streptomycin, used for the treatment of tuberculosis. These diseases are rather straightforward in the context that there is one bug that causes one disease, and we can think about one drug to therefore tackle the culprit of that disease. But the diseases that are the real major challenge today are much more complex than this. There are the diseases associated with aging, with cancer, diseases of lifestyle, type 2 diabetes, and of course you'll all be familiar and aware of diseases associated with new viruses that can attack us as human beings and of course as livestock, and also the threats of antibiotic resistance. So I'm privileged to be the current director of this Astbury Centre that brings together 68 principal research group leaders from across different faculties, different departments in the university. So from physics, chemistry, medicine, biology, molecular cell biology, etc. And we work together with this vibrant, well-equipped interdisciplinary centre to try and understand life in molecular detail. Only by understanding why and how proteins make us well can we understand why proteins behave badly and cause disease. So what you're going to hear about now is something about ageing. The ageing population, we're all getting older and we all want healthy old age. So we're going to learn about the relationship between the ageing population and boiling an egg. Are they unrelated phenomena, or do they have anything in common? If you boil your eggs, hopefully you don't end up over here. So a little bit about Alzheimer's disease. You'll all, I think, be well aware and will have been touched with the problems associated with Alzheimer's disease. This is just one of many disorders associated with proteins behaving badly as we age. Currently, there are 130 odd million people predicted to be living with dementia by the year 2050, and 68% of these will be in low and middle income countries. Indeed, every 3 seconds, someone in the world is diagnosed with dementia. And yet this class of ageing diseases where your proteins behave badly they're the only set of diseases that cannot be slowed, prevented or cured. This is a major threat to the health of the world going forwards. What happens when we age and our proteins behave badly is, rather than being nicely folded into a beautiful three-dimensional structure, they start to stick together into protein aggregates. These aggregates form the very famous plaques you'll have heard of in your brain. And these plaques, from reasons and mechanisms we do not understand, cause your neurons to die, giving the symptoms that we're so well aware of in the dementia field. So what we're going to now show you is what we mean by aggregation. And so over to you, Leon.
Thank you, Sheena. So good morning, everyone. So you're probably familiar with, if I crack an egg here, the proteins in eggs, like Sheena was saying, they're usually well folded and happy. So our egg white is transparent, it's slightly yellow, but we can see through it. Yet as soon as we apply heat, all the proteins start to unfold and stick together in this aggregation process. And that's all cooking is when we're cooking protein. But as well as heat, other phenomena can cause proteins to behave badly. So if I take another egg, and then I ask a kind volunteer to have a spell of this and tell me what you think it might be. It's nothing too dangerous.
It's like alcohol.
So something alcoholic, probably something like the halls of residence, may have a few bottles lying around. If I add this to the egg, though it occurs much more slowly, you can see proteins don't like being in an environment where there isn't any water, and you start to see a cooking phenomenon. Now, if you're at a Michelin star restaurant, to use Lisa Roberts' analogy, you may want to cook an egg in a more exotic manner and charge 50 quid or whatever. So if I take the egg and then I apply liquid nitrogen at minus 200 Celsius, though it takes a little bit longer, it starts to fry the egg, which I'll pass round. You might be able to see it starting to cook there. Yeah. But in our brains, we don't have minus 200 Celsius. We don't have a non-aqueous environment, and we don't have extreme heat. So how is that causing protein aggregation and our proteins to behave badly? Sheena.
So now you can see what we mean by protein aggregation. That's exactly what's happening in your brain as you age. So, of course, we've known about Alzheimer's for a very long time. This is Augustita, the First Lady that Alzheimer diagnosed Alzheimer's disease in. Actually, here in the University of Leeds, I love this picture. This is Sandy Geddes in the Astbury Department of Biophysics at the time, using the powers of X-ray diffraction, which Astbury himself developed, to try and understand the structure of these aggregates. Because if we can understand the structure of these aggregates, then we can start to think about controlling their formation and lengthening the ageing process. And I think this is the best time ever to look at this phenomenon, because you all may have heard recently the recent Nobel Prize for chemistry was given to the development of these powerful electron microscopes that allow us to see proteins and in cells in intricate details. And we're very privileged in the University of Leeds, through this £17 million investment that Lisa told you about, that we are the only university in the UK to have two of these instruments here in the university. give you a feeling of size, this is a 2-storey high building that these microscopes go from floor to ceiling. And you'll be able to see some of these with a virtual reality display in Parkinson later. So these powerful microscopes have, for the first time, allowed us to determine the structure of the fibrils in an Alzheimer brain that was published this year, this example from the Laboratory of Molecular Biology in Cambridge. We're sharing secrets with you today, so don't tell anyone this, but this is our work where we have now for the first time determined the structure of one of these protein aggregates that causes a different human amyloid disease. So that's protein behaving badly in your brain and causing disease. But proteins can also be very powerful, very useful to us. Because in fact, many of the drugs that we now make that target these very complex disorders are actually made of protein antibodies. So antibodies are proteins, and we want them to behave well and cure disease. So whilst only 11% of proteins in 1989 were made of protein antibodies, now these protein antibody drugs provide 26% of the market with a value of about £140 billion per annum. So here's a little history about these, thinking about the development of drugs. Aspirin, you'll all be familiar, it was patented in 1899. It has just 21 atoms, and if you take it regularly, the cost is about £8 per year. Over the 100 years since that point in time, we now have these protein antibody drugs able to tackle some of the biggest diseases facing us today. So here is Herceptin. It's an antibody drug against breast cancer and other cancers. It was approved in 1998. It has 20,000 atoms, and the cost is £40,000 per year per patient. If I put aspirin on this diagram on the same size, you can see how these drugs are much bigger and more powerful. So we have 100 years of development, 1,000 times more atoms, and 4,500 times the cost. Another antibody biopharmaceutical is Humira, an antibody drug against rheumatoid arthritis. This affects 400,000 patients in the UK alone and has a cost per patient of £10,000 per year. And of course, you will all be aware of the fact that whilst we may be able to develop these drugs, they are so costly that they can prevent the use in the clinic in the UK and other places. So biopharmaceuticals are a costly business. The major bottleneck in production of these protein antibody drugs is the proteins start to behave badly. They start to aggregate. We have to grow our proteins in large fermenters. We have to purify them through tubes and pumps and filters. We have to formulate them at high concentration so they can live on a shelf, and then we have to squirt them at rapid speed through narrow needles to allow them to be administered. And this is the major bottleneck because this flow induces proteins to behave badly. So I'm going to go back to Leon now, who's going to tell you about a project that we are developing across the university. It's linking a project within the Astbury Centre that involves biological sciences, but also the School of Mechanical Engineering, where we have put together a team involving PhD students, partly funded by the University of Leeds, postdocs and colleagues across campus to try and understand how flowing causes proteins to behave badly so we can make better and faster and cheaper protein drugs. And so we've been looking very carefully about flow-induced protein aggregation using both smaller scale and larger scale devices, which we have recently patented, and I'm going to hand back over to Leon.
Thank you. So if you just go forward one more slide, Sheena. The types of flow we're interested in is where flows are moving slowly and then moving quickly. So think if you're moving slowly, nothing will happen, but if there's a rapid acceleration to the protein, that might stress it and cause it to behave badly. So in order to understand this, we've developed an extensional flow device, which we affectionately call the squisher. And all it is two syringes connected together with a capillary. So the proteins are going slow in the syringe, and then they're going very quick, about 240 times faster in that capillary, and that's what we think might be causing some damage. So on this mock-up, what we think is happening is the flow's going slow, and when you get to this point, the flow really speeds up. So if you were a protein in that sort of region, this is a high-resolution model, then you'd be rolling along here, and then if you get to this point, you could unfold, put you in a state where you then might start to stick together like the egg and aggregate. So in order to work out what's been happening, we've subjected an array of different proteins to stress and used a variety of analytical methods to work out what's going on. For example, we've used nanoparticle tracking analysis to see the aggregates and size them. We've used electron microscopy in order to determine what they look like under the microscope. And we've also changed what speed we do our experiments at, slow speeds and fast. And we've identified regions where proteins behave well and where they behave badly. So you can see where there's red, proteins are being damaged, and in the blue zones, they're behaving well. So you might want to manufacture the proteins in environments similar to this, help reduce the cost of the manufacture of the medicines, which can then be passed on to patients.
Thanks, Leon. So just finally then to sum up about proteins behaving badly and our hopes for the future, we've gone from diseases, ageing, cancer, diseases of lifestyle. These are all involved proteins misbehaving that we need to control. But I've also hoped I've told you about our exciting work where we're using this fundamental knowledge to try and help build better biopharmaceuticals. So our hope for the future by this interdisciplinary research in the Astbury Centre is for improved health and better therapies by improved understanding of proteins behaving badly. So thank you, Leon, and thank you for listening.
Sheena and Leon, thank you for a superb talk. I told you I was the warm-up act for the cool stuff. Really good, thank you. And I'd like to introduce our second speakers who are going to talk to you about some radiotherapy research. So if I can introduce you to Professor David Seabug Montefiore and Louise Murray.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for the introduction. My name's Louise Murray, and I'm going to give you a bit of a flavour of the exciting things we're doing with radiotherapy research here in Leeds. Now, I'm aware that I met some of you back in 2014. There will be a small amount of overlap, and then I'll bring everybody up to date. So, first of all, just to introduce myself in a little bit more detail. As the accent suggests, I'm not from round these parts. I'm from north of the border, and I studied medicine at the University of Aberdeen, and that's where I did my first few years as a junior doctor. And I really ended up working in oncology by accident. My rota said I was meant to spend 3 months in haematology. But when I turned up for haematology, there were one too many doctors in haematology and one too few in oncology. Now, up until that point, I'd worked every single Christmas. So I said, well, I'll go to oncology if I can have Christmas off. And I got my wish. I went to oncology and I discovered a specialty that I loved. I loved the fact that you could make a real difference to patients, even in those circumstances, if you couldn't cure them of your cancer. You could help everybody. I was also very interested in the science behind this radiotherapy treatment. And on the basis of that, I decided I wanted to train as a radiotherapy doctor or a clinical oncologist. And that meant in 2007 it was necessary to move to Sheffield to do clinical training in radiotherapy. About a year or so into that, I did a small research project, and I was fortunate enough to win a trip to the MD Anderson Cancer Centre in Houston, Texas, a world-leading cancer hospital. And that was where I had my eyes opened. Up until that point, as a radiotherapy doctor in the UK, I thought everybody did their clinical training, and then they did exams, believe me, a lot of exams, and then they got on with the job. When I reached the States, completely different. The whole environment was steeped in research. Every single doctor had done a PhD. And it struck me, if the UK is going to lead in terms of radiotherapy research, then some doctors, like me, had to do research in radiotherapy. So I came back to Sheffield, more training, yet more exams. And finally, when that was over, I had the opportunity to come here to Leeds to do a PhD looking at technical radiotherapy. Well, there was my opportunity, and I learned a huge amount. Following that, I went to Toronto to Princess Margaret Cancer Hospital, another world-leading centre, and spent a year learning more about the clinical application of technical radiotherapy. And in September last year, I was delighted to be appointed to my current position of University Academic Fellow. So I spend 60% of my time doing research into radiotherapy and the other 40% looking after patients with cancer. So, on the subject of cancer, the reality. Current statistics suggest that 1 in 2 of us here today will be diagnosed with cancer. Now that is scary, but the good news is that our treatments are getting better all the time. And one of those treatments is radiotherapy, which is critical to curing patients with cancer. In fact, radiotherapy contributes to the cure of more than 40% of patients who are cured of cancer. And radiotherapy is not a new treatment. It's been around for over 100 years, but over the past decade or so, there have been huge technical developments that let us deliver radiotherapy to help patients in a greater way. So what is radiotherapy? So radiotherapy is simply high-energy X-ray treatment. And radiotherapy can damage cells, cancer cells and healthy cells. And the whole crux of radiotherapy is to get the optimal amount of radiotherapy to the cancer cells, but to minimise the dose to those surrounding healthy cells, because if we treat them, we'll cause damage and we'll cause side effects. So when a patient has radiotherapy, and they're lying on a bed like this is the head of the machine, and the radiotherapy comes out here, travels through the air, travels through some of the patient's healthy cells to reach the tumour inside them, wherever that might be. Now, when radiotherapy is switched on, you don't see it, you don't feel it, you don't hear it, and it only takes a few minutes. But this machine is on a gantry, and that means that radiotherapy can be delivered from multiple angles around the patient. And that means we can focus in on those bad cells, those cancer cells, and spread out or minimise the dose in those sensitive normal tissues. And each radiotherapy beam can be shaped to match the shape of the tumour that we're dealing with by virtue of this bit of the kit in the head of the machine that can make all sorts of interesting shapes to match the tumour, again sparing the normal tissues. So I mentioned, so here's an example of this in action. So this is a patient who's got prostate cancer, very common cancer. So this is our radiotherapy beam, and again you can see that this is changing all the time, it's always changing shape. And that's by virtue of these little leaves of tungsten in the head of the machine constantly shaping the beam to make sure we get all the radiotherapy we want to the prostate, but not too much to the bladder in front or the back passage behind. So one of the radiotherapy types that I'm particularly interested in is called stereotactic ablative radiotherapy. And that's, and that's using a very high dose of radiotherapy very precisely. So if we think about prostate cancer again, a very common cancer in men, as we know, traditionally when we gave radiotherapy, we would treat a patient for 10 minutes every day to a high dose, and that would take us 7.5 weeks. We'd bring the patient for 37 treatments. With stereotactic ablative radiotherapy, now instead, we can treat that patient to a much higher dose, but we can do it more quickly. It takes about 2 minutes to deliver a treatment. And the really great thing about SABR, or stereotactic ablative radiotherapy, is that we can do it in a smaller number of treatments. In fact, we can treat a patient completely in 5 or 7 treatments. And so the treatment is over, it's all wrapped up within a couple of weeks. Now, what a difference that makes for a cancer patient. Instead of coming for 37 visits, they only need to come for 5 or 7. So my current work is extending the benefit of this technique, this SABR technique. And I'm interested in using this technique in situations where the cancer has come back in an area that's already received radiotherapy. So we're back to prostate cancer again. And this is a patient, and this is a CT scan, and it's a slice through the patient. I'll just move across a bit. Slice through the patient going up and down like this. And it's a little bit like a heat map in that this is the prostate region here, and this is where the high dose of radiotherapy is going. And then the cooler colours, and these are the moderate or low doses of radiotherapy. So we've got the patient's hips here, and this is the prostate region, like I said, getting a nice high dose of radiotherapy. And this is the bladder, which is coloured green for this example. So this patient had 20 treatments of radiotherapy in 2013. Unfortunately, 3 years later, the cancer came back in one of the bones of his pelvis. And we gave that this SABRE, this very precise, very personalised high-dose radiotherapy treatment. Now, before we had SABRE, we would see this as a very negative situation. When cancer comes back like this, we would generally say, well, unfortunately, we can no longer cure this patient of his cancer. We might manage it in other ways for some time with other treatments, but we couldn't cure them. By using SABRE in a situation like this, because it's such a high dose and it's so precise, we actually have a chance of controlling this cancer for longer, and we may even cure some patients of their cancer. But this is a difficult thing to do well. I hope you can see that there's overlap between this radiotherapy heat map and this radiotherapy treatment, this radiotherapy heat map. And this is difficult. Unfortunately, it's not a case of just saying, well, this patient had 20 treatments before, and now we're going to give him 5. That makes 25 treatments. Oh, sorry. That makes 25 treatments. It's not as simple as that. And in fact, up until now, we would avoid this treatment in the UK because we're so worried about damaging the surrounding normal tissues. We don't want to do that. It's too risky. But as I say, with modern techniques, perhaps we can get this treatment in and cure more patients. So what are some of the challenges? Well, one thing is anatomy can change over time. Patients might lose weight, patients might gain weight. And in this patient's case, his bladder was nice and full before we started our treatment, and when we gave him his second treatment, it was empty. So what do we do with the dose that went to the bladder? How do we deal with that? And then the other big complicating factor is the science of radiotherapy, or radiobiology, and that deals with different treatment sizes, gaps between treatment and repair. And so at the moment, as I said, this is a challenging thing to do well and to do safely, but it has huge potential benefits for patients. And so at the moment, my work is designing a tool which takes account of anatomical changes and also the necessary radiobiology, that science of radiotherapy, to make this overlapping treatment as effective but as safe as it can possibly be. So we're creating that at the moment, and then the next step is to evaluate it. Look at the patients that we've already done an overlapping treatment to and say, what exactly did we deliver? Could we have made it better? And then the really unique step, and we're only doing this here in Leeds, is we're going to use previous radiotherapy treatments to help design and optimise and personalise an overlapping radiotherapy treatment, taking into account all these factors that I've mentioned, again, to give the best chance of controlling that patient's cancer without excessive side effects. And once we've done that here in Leeds, well then we're ready for prime time. This is not just relevant to prostate cancer. This is relevant for cancers anywhere in the body, wherever they might be, if there's overlap with previous radiotherapy. And that's not just relevant for patients in the UK, that's relevant for patients throughout the world. So that's a very specific example of the research that I'm involved with. I'd now like to hand over to my colleague David Seabag-Montefiore, who'll give you a more broad overview of radiotherapy research in Leeds. Thank you for listening to me.
So, thank you very much, Louise, and good morning, everyone. So, I've been in Leeds for just over 20 years. I'm a practicing clinical oncologist, and I've had the privilege to be the Audrey and Stanley Burton Professor of Clinical Oncology for just over the last 5 years. And over that time, I want to give you some insights in how the radiotherapy research group has grown, and actually put sort of Louise's example of the research into a broader context of what we're doing. So Leeds Cancer Centre, as you can see on this slide, opened approximately just about 10 years ago. Previously we were at Cookridge Hospital. This is one of the largest cancer centres in Europe. We treat over 7,000 new patients per year with radiotherapy and give over 85,000 radiotherapy treatments to those patients. This is also our lab. So where we want to develop and translate new approaches to the patient, we do through that, and Louise gave you a very nice example of linking technical radiotherapy with imaging, and there are many examples that we could give to actually improve the radiotherapy treatments for patients. I picked out 2 key collaborations, although there are many. One is the Leeds Clinical Trial Unit, which is a world-leading clinical trial unit, one of the largest in the UK. And one of the big areas that we are interested in is practice-changing clinical trials, showing that things make a difference through high-quality research and then translating that to the patient population. And also the Leeds Institute of Data Analytics, the other end of the spectrum, when we're actually looking at the real world of all the patients that we treat. I was amazed to read a statistic the other day that actually of the sort of data produced, electronic data that's produced in the world, 90% of that has been produced in the last 2 years. However, only 1% of that data has been analysed. So there is a real opportunity for us to harness all the information about radiotherapy treatment to improve the outcomes for patients in the future. So, this is me, Billy No Mates, 1st of January 2012. So, it's a very important example to show, I think, because the actual opportunity to grow the group came from significant philanthropic and charitable support. And without that, we could not have started. And what's happened is we've grown the group over the last 5 years, and now I have some friends. And so I have more than 20 research active clinicians and non-clinicians in the group, a fantastic multidisciplinary team. The third level down, I really want to pick out that tier because they are the future academic leaders, which we feel so passionately about. And I think you'd agree that the majority of people on this slide are significantly younger than me, and that's fantastic because they are the people who have the ideas and the energy for future research. So what are we known for in Leeds? Well, we can claim excellence in a number of areas. I mentioned earlier clinical trials. Clinical trials that are designed to show that we improve cancer outcomes, we improve survival and cure rates, and then when we do those studies, they have a global reach. They change practice around the world, and we have good examples of our achievements in that area. Also, not in clinical trials, but the opportunities, particularly the big data aspects, are an area that we're particularly active in now. And we have a wide range of expertise across multiple tumour sites, and we also have a very large patient population, as I've said earlier, to actually conduct that research. And we're passionate about growing our future academic leaders. Now that's just not my or Leeds University's opinion. Last year there was an internationally peer-reviewed exercise assessing radiotherapy research in the UK. And this shows our trajectory in Leeds between 2009 and 2015. And across these 4 domains, you can see that we were recognised as being internationally competitive with university support and in our clinical trials. But clearly, for radiotherapy imaging and technical radiotherapy, we want to go to that international level. So an insight in what's one important big step in radiotherapy. This is a CT scan. This is down in the pelvis again. And the red dotted lines which we've drawn represents where we think the target for cancer is. Let me show you what that image would be if we had an MRI scan, not a CT scan. Now we can see the red dotted line is the tumour. We were treating too large an area on that CT scan because we couldn't see the tumour well enough. Now, for technical reasons, which we can talk to you about in Parkinson, we require CT imaging to calculate radiotherapy dose, but we need MRI imaging to plan and target the treatment accurately. And the revolution that is coming is this machine called the MR-Linac. This is a machine that combines the linear accelerator that Louise showed you that treats patients and an MRI scanner in the same package, in the same room, working at the same time, and actually allowing us to image the tumours with the MRI, both for planning it, but also seeing whether the tumour is moving and tracking the tumour during treatment. That is a machine that is only installed in less than 30 centres around the world. We would be really keen to bring that technology to Leeds. So why do we need your help? Radiotherapy is the Cinderella specialty of cancer in my view. We only receive 5% of the UK cancer spend on radiotherapy. We have significant success with major funders, but we have key posts and equipment challenges which we find very difficult to fund, and therefore charitable and philanthropic support is absolutely key to our success. Now, I don't think we can compete with the liquid nitrogen of the previous talk, but in Parkinson we have a number of things to show you. Do come and see us. We can show you the baby Linac, we can show you more of the videos, and we can also tell you about this fantastic media story, which is a more personal nature, around when we're treating children with radiotherapy in the head and neck region, we have to use an immobilization mask. Now, we've got a fantastic play therapist, and this actual story has actually gone global, it's been retweeted by Mark Hamill of Star Wars, and we can tell you a little bit about that in Parkinson. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David and Louise. Impactful research that really does impact people's lives. And our final talk will take you into the world of microbubbles. And we have three people speaking there: Steve Evans, Sally Payman and Nicola Ingram.
There are four, yeah. So. Hello. We sit somewhere between the previous two talks, because one was very much at the clinical end and doing treatment, and one was very much at the basic biology end and understanding the fundamentals of disease. And what we're trying to do with our microbubbles is actually take that understanding from the molecular level to the point where we can get to the clinic. And so we're somewhere bridging between the last two talks. What we're going to talk to you about is microbubbles, what they are, how we make them and engineer them, because these are actually precise engineering, but engineering on a very, very small scale, why we're interested in doing it, and where we think this as a technology will go next. Oh, no. Oh, sorry, just... clicker isn't working, but we'll do that. Okay, so we're all familiar with bubbles. You come across them in many aspects of your lives. Hopefully today you may sample some of these, and you know that the nose of the wine actually contains is rich in aromatics, and so the bubbles are what give you your smell, which is a fundamental part of the taste in many ways. So, in that level, we're familiar with bubbles, and it's the bursting of these bubbles that gives you the aroma. Probably less familiar to many, but still quite commonly known, is that propellers actually cause cavitation. So as a propeller rotates, it creates a pressure difference. This rips apart the water on a small scale, creating bubbles which then implode, and as they implode, they cause corrosion. So we know bubbles, although they can be generally soft, they can actually contain quite a powerful and disruptive or corrosive nature. Even less familiar to most people is the pistol shrimp. So the pistol shrimp, here you see the pincer of the pistol shrimp. Here you see it enlarged. Watch carefully. As this closes, what you're about to see is a bright flash of light. What happened is as the pincer closed, it sent out a jet of water. That jet of water created a microbubble. That bubble instantaneously collapsed, and it had a huge amount of energy in it. What you're seeing down here is a bubble subjected to a sound wave. So as I speak to you, the sound waves travel out, they compress and expand the air, your eardrum responds to that. If I put a bubble into this...
Could you actually speak a little more loudly?
Loudly, sorry. Sorry, yeah. Can you hear me better here? Okay. So if we put a sound wave and the bubble is sitting in that sound wave, it will oscillate as the amplitude of the sound wave passes the bubble. This actually can create heating within inside these bubbles, and so what was being shown here This is a bubble emitting light. It's at the temperature of the sun, and yet it's a micron in size. Right? So there's a tremendous amount of energy stored within these tiny, tiny microbubbles. And what we're trying to do is to utilize these for medical applications. So the idea is that if we could introduce these bubbles into the vasculature, and as these bubbles go around the vasculature in the body, we can shine our ultrasound, so sound waves, onto these bubbles, and they will oscillate in response to those ultrasound signals. They will re-emit the sound wave. So this is a model, a schematic of a tumour, and as the bubbles go through, the tumour lights up like a Christmas tree. We'll just move slightly on. This is it's just about to show. So this is the tumour on the flank of the mouse. This is an image of an ultrasound image. And what you hopefully can see is that, I should have switched the lights down, but the brightness increases during the bubbles populating that tumour. So that means we can use ultrasound to locate these bubbles inside the body, and using conventional ultrasound scanners. So this would be a diagnostic microbubble, and clinicians are using these today to visualize blood flow, perfusion, to visualize cancers. But what if you could target a drug onto that microbubble? And as those bubbles go around and as they get to the tumour, you now burst those bubbles with your ultrasound. So what we're doing here is, this is schematically, so as the bubbles come into the tumour, we want to target them so that they stick only at the tumour site. And that ultrasound we've been using to image them, we want to just send a burst pulse which suddenly breaks those bubbles, releases the drugs only at the toxic target site. So that's what we want to do. What would these bubbles look like if I could construct the ideal bubble to inject into the vasculature? Well, a bubble is gas in liquid. We want a gas that you might put into the body that is harmless, that could go around the body but wouldn't cause any problems. Perfluorinated gases are used currently for injection into the eye or for filling the lungs after burns, so that's what we've gone for. But that wouldn't last very long in the body, so what we have to do is we put a coating, a shell around this bubble, and we take from biology. Biology uses lipids to coat cells and to create boundaries and interfaces, so we put lipids around the outside of this bubble. But actually your immune system would recognise this and say, this isn't the lipid from a normal body. So what we then have to do is we put some polymers around this bubble that actually give it an immune defense or stops the immune system recognising this as a foreign object. Then finally, and it was nicely introduced in Sheena's talk about antibodies, we want to target these bubbles to the tumour site. So what we want on the outside is some targeting that will take these and make them only stick at the site that we're interested in. That would be great. That would be a targeted imaging microbubble, but we want something a bit more complex than that because it's too easy. I mean, so this is a tiny thing we're trying to create, 1 to 3 microns. So this is tiny. But what we want to do really is to put drugs onto these things. So we can have very toxic drugs that we want to deliver, and we want to wrap these around the outside of that tiny bubble, but still have the polymer layer, still have the antibody layer, and that's my part of the job done. I've just decided what we want, and now it's up to Sal to say how she can actually do it.
Okay, good afternoon everyone. My name's Sal Payman. I'm a University Academic Fellow within the Microbubble Research Team. So how do we make these complex architectures on the outside of the bubble? So Steve's very much introduced it. We have a very complex architecture in order to make these bubbles therapeutic. So we have a layer that stabilises the bubble, makes it invisible to the immune system. We have a layer where our encapsulated drug is going to be attached to the bubble. And we also have a layer, very importantly, of these sticky proteins, these antibodies that are going to help us target those microbubbles directly to the cancerous cells and not the rest of the body. So our challenge number one is how are we going to make these microbubbles with this very complex architecture on the outside when these bubbles are so small we can't even see them by the naked eye. We have to look at them on a microscope. Okay, so how do we do that? How do we do that engineering? The second challenge is we don't just use 1 or 2 bubbles in our therapies, we actually use up to 1 billion bubbles per therapy. So the overall challenge for us is how do we make 1 billion identical microbubbles, all with this very intricate architecture on the outside in order for them to be therapeutic. And our solution is actually to fabricate very tiny, essentially very tiny factories. Okay, so what I'm holding up here, if you can see them, are microfluidic devices, but are also known as lab on a chip. Okay, so you might have heard of that technology already. And what's inside these microfluidic devices, if you put them on a microscope, is that you can see, which one's which? Is this yours?
I don't know. They look the same.
Yeah. You can see inside these microfluidic devices there's a network of tiny, tiny fluidic channels. And what that allows us to do is to bring every component we need to build that architecture together in a single area under a very controlled regime. So you can see we've got the gas that we want in the centre of our bubbles coming down the middle of 2 liquid streams that contain the lipids, but also the other components we need, such as the encapsulated drug and the antibodies. And as these bubbles form in this little nozzle, in very much like a spray regime, a bit like an aerosol but inverted, it goes through molecular self-assembly and it actually builds itself in that outlet so we can make our bubbles. So challenge number one, we can fabricate our bubbles on the micron scale with this complex architecture, but also what these devices allow us to do is to make very high concentrations of microbubbles. So using these microfluidic devices, we can make up to 1 billion bubbles per milliliter of liquid. Okay, and we can actually do this, if I probably don't have to bend down, in less than 12 minutes. So this is not a lengthy process whatsoever. It's very simple, it's very robust, and it's very quick. And what's really nice for us is that this particular microfluidic design that you see here, that I'm holding up, these bubble chips, were designed in Leeds about 7 years ago by ourselves, and we hold patents in both the EU and the US on this microchip design. And as far as we know, we are the only people that have a microfluidic design that can produce therapeutic microbubbles to these very high concentrations. Okay, so that's unique to Leeds. We also have built, to complement this, because these are quite tricky to handle, we have built an instrument that we call Horizon, in which these microfluidic devices form the core of. So anybody can use this machine to produce therapeutic microbubbles. You don't have to be an expert in microfluidics. You simply plug in one of these devices into the top, you press a few buttons to say go, and it produces 1 billion therapeutic microbubbles. So this is a fluorescence microscopy image, just in case you don't believe us about that very complex architecture. This is a cartoon of what's actually happening here, and these drugs have been labelled with a fluorescent tag sitting around the outside of the bubble, and this is what you can actually see in this fluorescence micrograph there. So, just in summary, we use microfluidic devices or miniaturized systems that are very specific to Leeds in order to produce billions of therapeutic microbubbles. And why we want to do that, Dr. Ingram is going to tell us.
Thank you. Thank you. So, my name's Nicola Ingram, and I'm a postdoctoral research fellow who's been working on the microbubble project since it started about 7 years ago, and I'm on the preclinical side, and I'm here to tell you why we're doing this for cancer. So, as you're all aware from talks earlier this morning, we're in the midst of being an ageing population, and with that we get increasing incidences of cancer, and not only do we get increasing incidences, but we're frailer as well, so we can't cope with massive doses of chemotherapy or invasive surgery to treat these cancers. So we believe that microbubbles, which actually deliver tiny amounts of drug to the tumour, are the answer to this, because you can concentrate that at the tumour site and spare the rest of the body. Also, we're in an age of personalised medicine, so one drug does not fit everyone, doesn't work for everyone. We can change the drug on our microbubbles very easily to suit a particular population, and we can actually also create cocktails of drugs that can be delivered. And in addition, as you've heard, ultrasound and microbubbles are used clinically already, and a particular speciality in Leeds is detecting different liver lesions. So if clinicians are used to using the technology, ultrasound and microbubbles, it's not a big step for them to move towards using this for therapy. Okay, so as we've said, the particular advantages of our bubbles in Leeds that we've created is we've put our drugs encapsulated and attach those to the bubble, and that allows it to remain in the vessels, the blood vessels of the body for much longer and protects it from degradation. We've got also two advantages in the double targeting of this. So with the antibodies, we can locally concentrate those bubbles to a much higher concentration around the tumour area. And then also our second level of targeting is the ultrasound pulse. So we can focus that ultrasound over the tumour and burst those bubbles in situ. And then they release their drugs locally and at much higher concentration. So it spares the rest of the body and hopefully improves that the effect on the tumour. So as we said, we've been working on this for about 7 years now, and we're at the preclinical stage. So we've been working at the bench quite hard, and we're really now at the stage of trying to move this towards the clinic, making sure that everything is of clinical grade materials and so on. And why we're doing this is because we got very excited basically with our results. So on the left here is a tumour, and the green is actually our bubbles flowing into that tumour. They've been pseudo-coloured green. So you can see them flowing through the blood vessels of the tumour. And on the right, if I move over, what got us really, really excited was if you don't treat tumours, they grow as the purple line. But if we put in our therapeutic microbubbles, targeted, carrying a drug, and zap them with ultrasound, you can completely cease tumour growth. And so we want to develop this for patients. Okay, and on to the future.
Okay, so hello, my name's Adam Churchman, and I'm currently finishing up a PhD within the Leeds Microbubble group. I'm going to tell you about the problem that my PhD tried to solve and roughly how we went about doing that. So it's very likely that everyone in this room has some point in their life taken some medicinal drug, be it for something as simple as a headache to something as complicated as cancer treatment. The number of drugs that we are currently developing is very high, and many of them are showing very promising treatments against cancer. However, there's a big problem that it's estimated between 40 to 70% of all of these drugs do not dissolve well or at all in water. Instead, they prefer oil-based environments. What this means is that if you were to try and inject these drugs into a patient's bloodstream, they might clump up, becoming a lot less efficient and potentially dangerous. As such, there is a great need to form some delivery system for these drugs that's partially oil-based. This is what my work tried to do. So we tried to make the structure that you can see in the top right, an oil layer inside microbubble. These bubbles are surrounded by a thin oil layer. This oil layer can then hold our very potent toxic drugs. Once we have this, we can then inject them into a patient's bloodstream. They're small enough that they can float around, and then once they get to a target site, we can both image them and then destroy them with ultrasound, releasing the drug just where we want it to be released. Within the time period of my PhD, which was roughly 3 to 4 years, we were able to develop a method of forming these bubbles, both reliably and simply. With further work, these bubbles could prove to be a powerful tool in opening up further drug treatment options. Now, at the end of my PhD, this work can feed back to the main bubble group, making the work as a whole slightly more versatile. I'll pass back to Professor Evans now to finish off.
Okay, so thank you. So hopefully the idea was that Adam would introduce where new PhDs can take the bubbles in new areas. This is the last slide, so don't worry. Lunch is going to be short. What we need to do now, what's important for us, is to speed up the translation. We know we have roughly 2 to 3 years before we want to get into clinic, and we're doing the work for that. Actually, the bubbles we've been developing have been largely for oncology so far, but we know, and we're talking to clinicians and are initiating projects now on the development of these for tackling infections. So biofilms that are growing on implants or on stents. This is actually a very nice way of tackling those. I had a telephone call last week from an oncologist, not from an oncologist, from a neurosurgeon in Sheffield Hallamshire University. Said, actually I've got this problem in treating stroke patients. I saw your work on bubbles, would you? So I went and talked to him, and we came away with 3 new project ideas, some of which are wacky science and fantastic, but I would love to do, and some of which are essentially doing what we've been doing in Leeds, but just a different clinical area. We know we can make nanobubbles. Actually, Sal didn't mention it, but another unique aspect of our technologies are making very small bubbles, much smaller than I've even shown. And we have a project just starting on that. So we've got all sorts of new ideas of where we want to take it. We have had some support this year from alumni funding. We've got two of these PhD students who've just started taking this into different areas. One in tackling this biofilm formation, the other in developing these nanobubbles that actually should get better penetration into tumours and actually give ultimately a better treatment outcome. So with that, I'd like to finish. I need to acknowledge the groups. This is very much interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary science involving physics, physical chemistry, medicine, which is all going off the edge of the slide, and engineering. So we're developing the ultrasound as well as developing these devices, these microfluidics. The people who've done the work are really in white, green and black. The people in white are the people who've not done the work. Okay. We'll come up with the ideas. With that, I'd like to thank you. And just to show bubbles that can also be fun, and nature always gets there before you. Dolphins create bubbles and play with bubbles and have lots of fun. So with that, I thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. What marvellous science with clear clinical application. Wonderful. So maybe over dinner tonight, as we raise a glass of our bubbles, we could maybe think how we could support Steve in getting this into clinic sooner. We don't have time for questions, but I'm reliably informed that all of our speakers will be in Parkinson Court over lunch and happy to talk further. And I'll be around as well if you would like to talk to me about anything. So please join us in Parkinson Court for lunch. Please look at the exhibitions. You probably won't have time to get around all of them. So just enjoy yourself, and we'll see you all later. Thank you.